program BelAhdan, the show that brings Arab identity to your living room. As we know, post 9/11, the Arabs are been in news so many times, been defined, and images of their identity been hijacked by the media, and usually there are ugly-looking people telling our story and define our identity, from Saddam Hussein to BelAhdan to Yasser Arafat and all that. So we have somebody, nice-looking person, know a little bit about the Arab identity. We have Dr. Basmah Ibrahim. She has a PhD in communication study and development, and she really studied the Arab personality, the Arab identity, and that's her expertise. And she wrote a book about it called The Communication Highway, as opposed to Communications Information Highway. I think this is a wonderful title. Welcome to BelAhdan.
Thank you.
Basmah. This is very nice. I know we've been trying to get you here for years now. And finally,
I'm here. That's great.
Finally, you are here.
Yes.
But you know, a lot been said about the Arab identity, and I know mostly Americans know it through movies and cartoons and Ihab Dagora and all that, terrorism and the 4 Bs, bad ones, belly dancing billionaires, and I don't know what the other ones is. But tell us a little bit how you got into the field and why the Arab identity that was your interest.
Okay. Well, I sort of accidentally, but I think quite naturally, end up where I am now. My parents came, as many do, as graduate students to the University of Minnesota. And, you know, when I entered college, I did what I was supposed to do as a nice, educated Egyptian girl. I was pre-med, thinking that's what everybody does, that's what I should do, right?
Doctor, huh?
So I did that, and I realized that wasn't really my thing. I wasn't bad in school. I mean, I was good. I could do it. I just didn't love chemistry.
Yeah,
but
don't want to blood and cutting people's.
Yeah, it just wasn't my thing. And so I decided to go into teaching. My mother was a professor, and I studied communication and psychology. And it's so interesting because most of my life, because I felt like I didn't follow the traditional path, I kept my sort of cultural experience quite separate from my educational and academic experience, and sort of didn't bridge those worlds very much. Nobody knew what I did, of course, because nobody knows what a major in communication is. So all my cousins in Egypt say, what do you study anyway? And
we're all talking here all the time.
Right.
That means they all majored in Egypt in communication.
Right, you know. So finally, it was really largely a result of what was going on in the world and the events of September 11, 2001, that led me to really see, and colleagues in the field, to push me to sort of focus on Arab Americans from a communication perspective. And I think that the fact that this is not a traditional field for many Arab Americans, or Arabs in general, we're highly underrepresented. And so many people in the news, so many people doing analysis, so many people doing intercultural training, which is what I kind of do on the side. There's not an Arab voice in that field. And so that has largely led to, I believe, many of the misperceptions and so on. And so I was already teaching at the time September 11th happened. I wasn't done with my dissertation yet. I was done with all my PhD coursework, and had been looking at identity and how we communicate identities, and was looking at people from multiple cultures. And as soon as September 11th happened, and including the Arabs as one of the groups, right after September 11th, when things started happening, and community members called me and said the kids were harassed at school, what are we going to do? And things started coming up even here in Minneapolis.
Minneapolis, nice.
Yeah.
Minnesota, nice.
Right. And I really realized, my dissertation advisor said, you just need to focus on Arab Americans. You need to look at Egyptians. That's your culture. You need to narrow it and do just this. And so I
don't want to argue with your advisor.
That's right. So that's when I really focused, at least that part of my work, on Egyptian Americans like me, who were largely raised in this country.
Oh, so this is, interesting.
Or who came at a young age, preschool age, so that English is their primary language, as well as Arabic. And and seeing how they sort of balance the competing values that they experience growing up. And you know, you think about the challenge, and you can probably relate to this, of people who come as adults and maybe start their families here or come with young children, and they've grown up with a completely different set of values and ideas and notions of community and family, and then they're raising these kids in this culture, and it's moving so fast, and the potential for tension and all that stuff, I mean, it's huge.
You talk about class of culture, it's right there in the same household, but so how do you study that? What do you actually do?
Well, what I did for my dissertation is I took, because there wasn't much out there, I did a more of a qualitative research approach for this. So I did in-depth interviews and follow-up interviews with people who fit the criteria, people who were young adults, came prior to the age of 4, because I wanted them to be fluent in English as a primary language as well as Arabic. And they had varying fluency in Arabic. But it was important because our language is so tied to our culture. And so many of the cultural values are carried through the language. So it was that's why I narrowed it down to people who had come here or were born here at that age, but whose parents came as adults from Egypt. And did in-depth interviews, and there are some sort of cultural dimensions and models of cultural differences that exist across cultures, and so I used that as a guide, but really just looked at what emerged. I asked people about their experiences, their points of greatest tension between their parents and themselves, and what cultural values clashed for them, how they communicated their identities, how these things affected them.
What did you find out? Who are we? I'm confused. I don't know who I am.
Yeah, well, at the core of much of the tension, there's some interesting things that came up. At the core of much of the tension is a tension between having parents who grew up in a highly collectivistic culture where, extended family is important and decisions are made collectively. And raising their children in the most individualistically motivated society on the planet. And so many tensions came up, really, that could be traced to this one dimension of collectivism, individualism. And that's the case of so many immigrant groups. I mean, so much of this applies across different immigrant groups.
The Asian and even the Italian in some sense.
Yes, absolutely.
Jewish.
And there are many different factors that play into that as well. For example, the Middle Eastern culture has a pretty high structure of power distance, where it's important to recognize status and
all the
power
divisions. In
divisions.
the hand of Mubarak.
It's interesting, isn't it? We could talk. That's a whole nother show.
That's another show.
Political, whatever. Yeah. But so that's one thing. And another interesting concept that came up from the interviews was this notion of culture freezing. And I don't know if you've heard culture freezing.
Does it have something to do with living in Minnesota?
Right. Not quite.
No.
But really, it actually came up because one of my cousins was living with me at the time. She was here from Egypt. She's a dentist. She was 27 years old at the time, as I was doing this research. And I came home one day from an interview, and I was telling her a little bit about what this young man had said about his experience. He was actually a medical resident living at home with his parents, living a traditional Egyptian life at home, yet, having American friends, playing on a football team, and, all of that. And I was telling her a little bit about what he was saying about his parents and how they, have rules in the house. And she said, "That's crazy. It's not even like that in Egypt anymore." And I said, and she said, I have so many freedoms. It's not that traditional. It's not this. I can go out. I can do all these things. And what happens is, and I started researching a little, is that so many immigrant parents are parenting from a frozen model. Those that are, there are many that embrace U.S. American culture and balance it and find ways to do that. But there's so many that are afraid, I think, of American society.
So it's a response to the mainstream culture.
Yeah, so they have come here, 20 years ago, or they've maybe not that long ago, but they come and they have a picture of Egypt, for example, of what it was like when they left. And now they have a kid who's 18 years old, and they are raising their child in the framework of Egypt 20 years ago.
I see.
So, which is actually more traditional
Yeah.
than Egypt is now, you know. And so this idea that the cultural experience for them is frozen in their
Interesting.
minds.
I see.
And then, and so they're setting up themselves.
So they are
to
more
produce-
traditional than
than
back home.
Yes.
Co-
Some are. I mean,
yeah,
this
some,
isn't
yeah,
true
of
of
course,
everyone.
there is agree. And their kids,
And
how
they're-
about their kids? They
well-
become traditional when they go home, when they meet their cousins and
Yeah.
nephew and nephew, and they also think of them as the image they see, you know, how their parents talked about
Right.
it. They found their niece and nephew also